Hello, and welcome to One World, One Health, where we take a look at some of the biggest problems facing our world. I'm Maggie Fox. This podcast is brought to you by the One Health Trust with bite-sized insights into ways to help address challenges such as infectious diseases, climate change, and pollution. We take a One Health approach that recognizes that everything on this planet, the animals, plants, and people, and the climate and environment are all linked. Dengue is one of the fastest spreading infections in the modern age. It's caused by a virus carried by mosquitoes, the Aedes aegypti and the Aedes albopictus mosquitoes that follow people into cities and into newly cleared areas. They're insects that thrive as climate change warms the world and disrupts weather. World Health Organization estimates say between 100 million and 400 million people get infected every year. Brazil's been hit especially hard. In 2024, dengue infected more than 6 million people there, 4 times more than the year before. So doctors are keen to develop a vaccine to protect against it. But dengue's tricky. There are 4 strains, and the first time people get it, they're usually not that sick. The trouble comes when they catch a second or a third strain. That's when they develop serious or even deadly symptoms. That makes it challenging to develop a vaccine because vaccinating a person can make the body react as if it had a previous infection rather than protecting it. In this episode, we're chatting with Dr. Andre Siqueira at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, or Fiocruz, in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He's also now at the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDI. He helped develop a single-dose vaccine that's just been shown to protect people well against several strains of dengue. The vaccine's been approved and is being deployed in parts of Brazil now. Andre, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's really great to be with you.
Well, I'd like to ask you, first of all, to tell us a little bit about dengue, the 4 different types, and why it has been so hard to develop a good vaccine to protect people against it.
So one of the features of dengue is not a single virus, it's not a single agent. So there are actually 4 dengue viruses that although they have a lot of similarities between them, they also have a lot of differences that make it possible for an individual to have up to 4 dengue infections, to be sick with dengue for 4 times because the protection conferred by infection with one serotype protects us against that single serotypes, but not against the other 3. And the challenge for the development of vaccines is that there is a phenomenon called ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement, in which the antibodies produced against one of the serotypes can facilitate the entry of the other serotypes in the host cells and lead to higher viremia, higher replication, and consequently more severe disease. So the challenge is that if you don't produce a vaccine that has a balanced protection against the 4 serotypes at the same time, there is the risk that the vaccinated individuals will be prone to developing more severe disease than non-vaccinated people.
And this vaccine that you worked on was designed to protect against all 4 types at once.
Exactly. Actually, this vaccine, it is composed by the 4 serotypes with the aim of, it's a live attenuated vaccine. So it's a vaccine with the viruses that cause dengue, but they are attenuated, meaning that they don't have the virulence factors that the wild type viruses have. So they, like other vaccines that we have, once they are injected, they reproduce in the body, but they lead to the production of antibodies and cell responses that are aimed to protect the individuals against the infection, against the disease, but not making them sick.
They've been weakened in a way that won't hurt people, but produces a very strong immune response, right? Live viruses like this, attenuated, as you say, weakened, produce a very strong immune response.
Yes, perfectly. So they are weakened, so they don't cause the disease, but they cause the immune response.
This latest trial you tested in 16,000 people. Can you tell us about the group you tried it in, who they were, how long the trial lasted?
So yes, the trial started in 2016 in 16 cities of Brazil, 16,000 people, so a lot of 16s. And it was evaluated in individuals between the age of 2 and 59 years of age. Each individual after vaccinated, so they could be allocated to the placebo or the vaccine arm, and they were followed up for 5 years until the termination of the trial when all the data was collected and analyzed to give the results that are now available.
Okay, and this is important because some people who question vaccines have asked, are they tested against a placebo? This is a big word you hear a lot. What you did is you vaccinated some people, other people were not vaccinated at all, right? And you compared what happened to them over 5 years.
Exactly. So it's one situation in which we believe, and all the authorities that evaluated the trial, the regulatory agencies, the ethics committee agreed with the placebo arms. Now we have more vaccines in the market, but when they started the trial, there were no alternatives. So we wanted to demonstrate that the vaccine could protect individuals against the disease and against the severe outcomes. And for that, the allocation was for each placebo vaccinated individual. There were 2 individuals in the active arm. So there was 2-to-1 ratio of allocation. So more people were vaccinated than received placebo. And with that, we were able to demonstrate the efficacy results.
And what were the results?
The results is that the vaccine has an 80% efficacy in protection against disease, dengue disease. In Brazil, due to the recent epidemiological trends, we were only able to conclude against dengue 1 and 2. There were no circulation of dengue viruses 3 and 4 during the study. And there was also a very meaningful efficacy against severe dengue. So the people in the vaccinated arm had much less hospitalizations than the ones in the placebo arm. So it was 79% against disease and close to 100% against hospitalization.
This is a big deal, right? I mean, sometimes people get mixed up and they think, well, if it didn't protect me from getting infected, it didn't work. But what you really want to do is keep people from getting so sick that they have to go to the hospital or might die.
For a public health perspective, for individual perspective, if we can protect against disease and against the severe outcomes, there's a big relevance for the individual that won't be sick and won't be severely ill and have the risk of dying from that infection, and also a collective impact in which it reduces the strains during outbreaks, during epidemics. So very much like COVID, when we have epidemics, their health units, they are overcrowded. So people with the disease and with other health conditions, they suffer that impact because health professionals are not able to deal with the volume of people seeking care. So if we can have that impact in reducing the burden of dengue, the clinical burden of dengue, there is a major impact in the affected regions.
Dengue can make people very sick. Can we talk about the range of symptoms?
So, although the proportion of individuals that develop severe disease, if someone thinks about 1 to 5%, might not seem very high, but if you have a big epidemic, it will be a very high absolute number. But what we call mild dengue, and mild can be a misleading word in that extent because it causes a lot of very high fever, myalgia, fatigue, headaches. So even what's called mild dengue, it's very intense and cause very intense symptoms that make people unable to do their activities. They have to be lying in bed for days and sometimes weeks due to the consequences of dengue. So that's not mild at all, although people may not be required to be hospitalized and be in the intensive care. They will be unable to do their activities, work, study, and this has major consequences as well.
And you use that medical word myalgia, but what we're talking about is when you ache all over. And dengue has a nickname. It's called breakbone fever. Can you talk about that symptom?
So people have a lot of pain in all the muscles. They have aches throughout our bodies, and it's very debilitating. And that's what happens with dengue for days, and sometimes 2 or 3 weeks it may ensue. So that's really debilitating. That's where the breakbone fever name comes from.
So, this is a vaccine developed and made in Brazil. What does that mean? Can you make enough for Brazil, and can you make enough for other countries?
So that's a really good point. The vaccine, it's an international collaboration in terms that these attenuated weakened virus were developed by the NIH in the US. And then they made the option to license its further development and production to many companies in the world. So there are companies, it's Butantan in Brazil, but there are also companies in India, in Asia, in Europe, in the US that are also working towards developing their products. Butantan has the license for Brazil, so it's now focusing on being able to provide for the public health system of Brazil. It's trying to scale up for the needs. So we have more than 200 million inhabitants, so there's a big population to be covered. But there are discussions underway. I'm not involved as I'm not part of Butantan and the other companies involved to try to speed up that production, scale up, and make it available not only in Brazil, but in the rest of the world and protect more people against the disease.
Is there going to be enough vaccine for everybody in Brazil?
They have committed to deliver around 50 million doses in the next 4 years. So that's the current status. So they are working on increasing capacity, and that's their goal.
Will there be enough vaccine to affect the outbreaks of dengue in Brazil?
It's possible that it will have a major effect, and it will depend on the strategy the Minister of Health is discussing and taking over on trying to prioritize areas, direct the doses where it will have the biggest impact. So it does have the potential. If you think of nationwide, there's a lot of heterogeneity in transmission. So meaning that as transmission is not the same in all the regions at the same time. So if you direct them with the best possible evidence in terms of health surveillance and strategy, it can have a bigger impact.
Zika swept through Brazil a few years ago, and there was a question as to whether the considerable exposure to Zika, which is related to dengue, affected immunity. Can you say anything about that? I know some people were even questioning whether Zika was like a type 5 dengue.
Zika is the same virus family, it's flavivirus, so it's very similar in some aspects to dengue. There are some evidence in Brazil that people who had never had dengue and were infected with Zika, they were at higher risk of having complicated dengue when exposed to dengue. And that's the same mechanism that I mentioned before, the antibody-dependent enhancement. But there are also conflicting evidence on that. So we actually will need to understand better how this relationship works and wait for more evidence to be produced. So even when we try to understand how the sequence of viruses, so there is the name of the dengue viruses, there's dengue 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there are a lot of factors associated with protection and risk in terms of does it matter what's the viruses that infects first and the interval between one infection and the other. And we know it does, but how to explain it and what is the sequence that is more dangerous or safer, we don't yet know for sure. It's really messy, and Zika didn't come to make it simpler. On the contrary.
Lots of people remember the dengue vaccine trial that went badly wrong in the Philippines a few years back. What did you learn from that trial, and did your team work to prevent the same problems?
This is indeed a very meaningful and important fact that happened throughout this process of development of dengue countermeasures, dengue vaccines. So what happened is the dengue vaccine was the first one to be rolled out in some places, in either in the public or the private sectors. And what happened is that there was an imbalance in the production of antibodies. So there was a much higher antibody titers against dengue 4 than the other serotypes. So that ended up exposing people who had never had dengue and were vaccinated. They had higher risk of developing severe disease than the ones who had not been vaccinated. That effect disappeared once that were vaccinated had prior dengue infection. So the vaccine had protection in that situation. But the problem is that there was a lot of discussion on that, and there was a change in the label. So the vaccine was only recommended to people who were seropositive against dengue. So they had laboratory confirmed evidence of previous dengue infection. So that ended up having an effect of reducing the confidence in the vaccine and reducing the uptake for that dengue vaccine. And in the end, now the company that developed it decided to stop production also because of the new vaccines in the market. And what we took as a learning from that experience is that we need to invest in products that have a balanced protection. So one of the good features of this current vaccine produced by Butantan in conjunction with NIH is that there is well demonstrated replication of the 4 serotypes of dengue in the vaccinated people. So it was measured. So volunteers were vaccinated with that vaccine and they had samples drawn each day, and it demonstrated that the 4 serotypes were present in the bloodstream of the volunteers. So we know that the production of antibodies is also related to the replication of the weakened, the live attenuated viruses. And if we have that evidence, it is a much stronger result in terms of producing a balanced response. And the follow-up studies in showing the titers of antibodies, now they were very consistent with that finding. So we are much more confident that this won't be a major issue for that vaccine.
Will you be following up with patients in your trial to see if strains 3 and 4 of dengue virus ever circulate and if people are protected against those strains?
That's a really good point and a very important question. So this is being addressed now with big follow-up studies. In terms of some cities in Brazil, they are having mass vaccination with this vaccine. Dengue 3 is now entering Brazil, so it's spreading currently. So it's very likely that we will be producing evidence on how this vaccine protects and behaves against dengue 3. Dengue 4 has not been circulating recently, but with the follow-up, we expect that at some moment in the future it will, and we'll be able to assess it. So this is being done with surveillance, with participation of Butantan, but also the Ministry of Health in terms of increasing testing for the serotypes and having a better surveillance of that, and also having the registry of people that have been vaccinated. Also, studies are being conducted with similar vaccines. There are some differences in how it is being produced, manufactured by the other companies, but there's been studies conducted in India, in Southeast Asia, that might capture the effect of this vaccine against the other serotypes as well.
Is there anything else you can tell us about controlling the spread of dengue?
So we know that dengue is expanding, although we are very optimistic, not only with the vaccines, but also with innovation in vector control, such as Wolbachia, new technologies that are being developed. Dengue will still continue to expand in the next years, in the next decades, due to climate change, urbanization, all the migration and other risks, political risks, financial risks in terms of the health systems. So although the vaccine is very promising, we can't just wait that it will solve all the problems and that dengue will disappear. So we need to have a strong set of countermeasures against dengue. So apart from the vaccines, and new ones are likely to be developed even with more modern technologies. We are working with the Dengue Alliance, so DNDI, Fiocruz, and other organizations from endemic countries, also in the development of treatments against dengue. So once we have established epidemics, and especially we know that some vulnerable groups are at higher risk of developing severe disease, and they are unfortunately not covered by the live attenuated vaccines, such as elderly individuals, infants, pregnant women. We will need other solutions. So that's why we have that alliance trying to develop treatments, antivirals, and host-directed therapies that could reduce the risk of developing severe disease and also reducing the strain against affected health systems. So there has been also progress in this front. There has been support for the conduction of clinical trials, initially using monoclonal antibodies against dengue, but also on the pipeline, we have antivirals, we have immunomodulatory drugs that could be deployed during epidemics to reduce duration of symptoms, risk of development of severe disease. So we believe that we will need to use all the available tools in combination to have the best impact against dengue.
Andre, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us.
It was a pleasure, and I'm always ready to answer your call.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it. You can learn more about this podcast and other important topics at onehealthtrust.org. And let us know what else you'd like to hear about at OWOH@onehealthtrust.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to One World, One Health, brought to you by the One Health Trust. I'm Ramanan Lakshminarayan, founder and president of the One Health Trust. You can subscribe to One World, One Health on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at One Health Trust, one word, for updates on One World, One Health and the latest in research on One Health issues like drug resistance, disease spillovers, and the social determinants of health. Finally, please do consider donating to the One Health Trust to support this podcast and other initiatives and research that help us promote health and well-being worldwide. Until next time.